In this slideshow, we're going to talk about grammar for modals in statements and requests. So modals are used to express a variety of social functions. They express duty and obligation and ability and request and advice, suggestions, certainty and uncertainty, possibility and impossibility, expectations. In this module and in this video, we're focusing on how modals are used in emails to do two things: to make statements sound less opinionated and absolute, and to make requests sound less authoritative and bossy. So let's first talk about statements. Use modals in emails to make statements less opinionated. So when you are not the expert on the matter, and especially if you are writing to someone who is that expert, and especially if you're talking about a matter that is their area of expertise and not your area of expertise, then you want to make your statements less opinionated. Statements without modals sound 100% certain. So these statements here, for instance, sound like indisputable facts. His leg is broken. She is aspirating. The medication weakened her heart. She will be discharged tomorrow. When you make statements like this, it sounds like no reasonable person would disagree with you or can dispute your fact. And indeed, some statements are statements of fact. They're indisputable. His leg is broken might be an indisputable fact. I mean, nobody could argue with it if you can see the bone, or if the doctor has examined the leg and an x-ray has been taken and it shows that the bone is indeed broken, then it's an indisputable fact. On the other hand, some facts are disputable. They aren't certain. Someone could disagree with you, and that person might be more of an expert than you in that area. So, for instance, a nurse who has just examined a child would be more likely to tell the parent, his leg could be broken, or his leg might be broken. If the nurse said his leg is broken, that might be premature. They haven't taken the x-ray yet. The doctor can't see the leg. If the leg is completely bent, well, then it's broken. But if it's disputable, then it's premature. And more importantly, it could be viewed as diagnosing the problem, which is outside the nurse's scope of practice and is certainly outside an HCA's scope of practice. So you can use modals to show how certain you are. And this diagram here lists modals from those that express certainty, they're very certain, to those that show that you're not certain. So the medication must have weakened her heart is very certain. She's got to be aspirating is very certain. She may be discharged tomorrow is not so certain. The medication could have or might have weakened her heart, or she might be aspirating. Those are less certain. So lower on the certain scale sounds more polite if you're not the expert, and especially if you are writing to the expert about an area that they are expert in and not you. So sometimes, though, you are making a statement that is outside your scope of practice as an HCA. If that's so, you need to do more to minimize the force or the certainty of your statement. A modal may not actually be enough. So if you're worried that the statement is too forceful, you could try turning it into a question. You could add, do you think? Do you think his leg might be broken? Or do you think she could be aspirating? Do you think the medication could have weakened his heart? Or do you think she should be discharged tomorrow? Another way to turn a statement into a question is to move the modal to the front. So start with could or should. Could his leg be broken? Could the medication have weakened his heart? Should she be discharged tomorrow? Here, these are more like hints, they're questions. You're getting your idea across, but you're not sounding absolutely certain, and it doesn't sound like you are talking outside your scope of practice. If you're worried about it, you could add in some softeners. You could say, do you think maybe his leg could be broken? Or do you think perhaps the medication could have weakened her heart? Or could the medication perhaps have weakened her heart? Or could she perhaps be discharged tomorrow? So let's also talk about using modals in emails to make requests sound less bossy. All right. So imperatives, or imperatives are sentences that begin with the verb, and they sound they're commands. They sound like commands and directions. So, and they can sound very bossy or authoritative. So double check the medications. Be prepared to discuss her swallowing difficulties. Check with Susan on that. Now, sometimes you want to sound authoritative. For instance, if you're giving directions to someone who's learning something new and you're just giving them instructions on how to do something, you might indeed use imperatives. You might also want to use this tone when you're dealing with a subordinate who's not been listening to you and who keeps making the same mistake. So if you're teaching someone about how to give medications and you to say, make sure you double check the medications, that's fine. If you're talking to someone who knows they should double check the medications but keeps forgetting to do that, you could say, make sure you double check the medications. So that's fine. Those are cases where you want to sound authoritative and emphasize your point, but you don't always want to do that. And modals can express different degrees of obligation. Um, they can express strong obligation, like you must double check those medications. You've got to double check the medications. You have to double check with Susan, or you have to check with Susan. You'd better be prepared to do this. That's strong obligation. Even you should check with Susan is also pretty strong. Could you be prepared to explain modals, or can you check with Susan? You might want to double check her medication. Those have less obligation. All right. So modals can either increase or decrease a level of obligation. So using modals that imply less obligation, the modals that are at the bottom of the scale here, these can turn a directive into a polite request or a polite suggestion. All right, let's just look very quickly at these requests and suggestions. Requests are often in question form. So could you check with Susan? Can you check with Susan? Would you mind checking with Susan? All right, those are requests. Suggestions are in statement form. You might check with Susan. You could check with Susan. But just a culture note and a little bit of a warning about Canadian workplaces. In Canada, a suggestion from your boss, you could check with Susan, is often a polite request. You could check with Susan means, could you check with Susan? And in fact, a request often is just a basic imperative, a directive, a command. So saying you could check with Susan, if the boss tells you could check with Susan, that might mean check with Susan. So depending on who you're speaking to and whether you have the right to make a suggestion or request, you probably want to use modals that have less obligation, but a modal may not be enough, and we'll talk more about that in the next video.